that he was utterly disgusted. I would never wish to incorporate this technology into my art at all. I strongly feel that this is an insult to life itself. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Sketchwave, our weekly show where we talk all things digital art and Procreate. And I say we because it's myself, Joel, and my co-host, the one and only James Julier. James, how's your week been, mate, since we last spoke?
Yeah, pretty good. Done a bit of garden. It's been a change of weather
Nice.
here in the UK, isn't it? So I've been out in the garden, I'm about to paint the decking later today. We're actually recording this in the daytime, aren't we, for once? We're normally doing this at the end of the day where we're both a bit tired. So
so this is what our skin normally looks like, not like what you normally see. What you normally see is just knackered at the end of the day.
How are you?
Good. Just cracking on with content. That's it, really. Nothing else really different this week. Well, I say nothing else different this week, but there's a lot of controversy in the AI space, which of course you'll have been able to see from the title of this episode. Now, we've spoken about AI a couple of times here, but this week in particular, it's quite kind of close to home, especially the fact that you, James, really enjoyed, the Studio Ghibli art style. And so I'm just going to go over a little bit of the news because this week, ChatGPT rolled out a new update where there was a bunch of new features regarding image generation. It's gone to like another level of accuracy. And it's much better now at adding text, for example, onto images, as well as creating really realistic images. Like you can ask it, for example, to try and take create an image of like a night out, and it just looks completely real. You wouldn't know anything else was, that it was AI generated.
Yeah.
But it's going viral at the minute, and it's causing some really heated debates online because there is a Studio Ghibli trend at the minute. Where you can ask ChatGPT to turn any image into a new image, but in the style of the famous Studio Ghibli. Now, this is actually being quite popular, should I say, because a lot of people are turning famous memes, such as the girl with the fire in the background meme, the house burning down in the background, she's just smiling to camera, into Studio Ghibli art style pieces. And people have just run with it. Like so many different memes have been taken. And just because they're popularly, culturally quite popular things and recognizable things, that to see them in that art style, probably, a lot of people have seen those images normally and now get to see them in the AI generated version. And this is just like spiraled like massively out of control. If you go onto X, formerly Twitter, and you search up Studio Ghibli, it is just everywhere. People are just taking profile pictures of themselves, turning it into Studio Ghibli style. The amount of people that also say it wrong is horrific. Ghibli or Ghibli or something like that. Like they're really no idea. But yes, it has just exploded. And the people's creativity in like moments like this really does, spark, like crazy. For example, there was a person who created a Lord of the Rings trailer solely in the Studio Ghibli style. And it was a mix of, visually it's stunning. And, admittedly, when you see a lot of these images initially, they look amazing because that art style is what it's dreamy, it's kind of fantasy-like, and it's soft, and it's like, there's so much to it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, this has actually just gone crazy because of course, what you could argue is the negative style. Well, you can't argue it is the negative style. One of the co-founders of the studio was actually seen. There's a quote initially from him previously where he was at a presentation of an artificial intelligence model which could learn certain movements, and his immediate response was that he was utterly disgusted. He said, I would never wish to incorporate this technology into my art at all. I strongly feel that this is an insult to life itself. So
very strong words. Yeah.
There's a lot to unpack there. There's a lot to look at and a lot to unpack. What's your initial kind of thoughts on it? Because of course you've got the two-star, you've got like people just what they innocently to a degree are having fun. They're just, seeing what their favorite photo of themselves or family or whatever it may be and turning it into an art style that of course looks very aesthetically pleasing.
I mean, you can see that you would enjoy using it and testing it and trying it out, and there's no question from just a user's point of view, it looks great and give me a go. Unfortunately, that's going to be the response of most people, isn't it? I suppose to a trend like this is that it is fun. I want to see what an image of my family or my own images, or in some of them they are kind of memes, aren't they? The one on the right there, the little girl in the car seat, for example, is a famous kind of video clip that's been memed to death, isn't it? Or a still,
Yeah.
anyway. It's a difficult one, really. I think that I think my biggest concern is that it would ultimately devalue the style as it become too widespread and too easy and just everywhere. That then the originators of that kind of aesthetic and that style, it becomes kind of, I don't know, kind of cliche then after a point, isn't it? And I think that's the case with a lot of art when it's super successful anyways. It becomes a bit, you know, I don't know, easy to mock and easy to dismiss because it's so saturated in the market. A good thing about Studio Ghibli is there's only a limited number of titles out there. Um, and so each one, has been labored over. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of hours put in by the artists and the creators. And so they have a mystique, they have a special kind of magic that that just that artistry and love and care has been put into it. And I think that this, unfortunately, it goes a long way to devalue that. I think if people start to see it all over the place and they associate it with that quick, forgettable, doesn't have any real value, and they can turn anything into that style, then unfortunately it potentially muddies the waters and takes that feeling, and sometimes it is only a feeling, and aesthetics and trends and what's fashionable and what people like is sometimes just the vibe that goes with it. And there's plenty of examples like that, I think, where things have become so popular that they almost become unpopular again. It comes
Mm.
out the other side, which would be a real shame for Studio Ghibli and that people that have worked so hard to create that aesthetic. I think. What do you think?
I think there is a presumed innocence to it for a lot of the general public. Like a lot of people just there'll be a huge percentage of people that have no idea what Studio Ghibli is,
Of course,
what
yeah,
it is as like a company or an artistic studio, or what they produce. There will be an element of just innocence for the general public, and you can't fault them for that to a degree. Like you can't.
No.
They're seeing a trend, they jump on it, and don't understand sort of its origins. And I think there's almost this, like, I feel like there should be some sort of extra part of it that's missing in terms of, if you're going to say, create this image in a Studio Ghibli style, whether or not, this isn't necessarily something that like these generators would want to do, but there should almost be like this additional question potentially of like, are you aware of what Studio Ghibli is? Like, should there be an extra step involved to say, at least it be informative? Because as far as some people may know, Studio Ghibli as a name was created 2 weeks ago for content creation and like image generation only, and that was only ever its sole
People will
purpose.
forget.
And it maybe even it's a style that ChatGPT created themselves in order for people to have fun and create interesting images, not understanding necessarily where its origin comes from. So that part of it, I think, is really, let people off a little bit, the general public side of it.
Of course, yeah.
But I think on the other hand of it, the company, there's a real imbalance here of morals to it, because, it's obvious then that they've been training the model on artistic styles, because if it knows necessarily what Studio Ghibli is and exactly what its style is and can create images in its style, then it has been heavily detailed and trained in that content. Which then, as always with these things, there's a copyright issue. Have they paid the studio for the intellectual property to then go ahead and then train the model on? You get into this situation of almost like this lawless generative society in a way, where all these models a lot of these. So sometimes I feel like I also need to explain it to everybody as well, because I'm in this space work wise, so I understand it a little bit more.
Sure.
So, but these models, so a model is like ChatGPT, and it needs information to learn off of to then provide that information out as a new result or a new answer potentially in response to a question. But sometimes with these models, you can ask it to do other stuff. You can ask it to generate an image. You can ask it to do X, Y, and Z, and create PDFs and create documents and everything like that in lots of different spaces. But it obviously has to have learned from somewhere. So you have to bring that information in from somewhere to then be able to at least accommodate for that answer. And what I think is really interesting now is, and it's opening up my mind as we're talking about it more, is what other artist styles have been found by the company and are then just not yet popping off in terms of virality that we don't know about yet. Like if you typed in, change, upload the same image, but asked it to do it in a Picasso style or something like that, would it know what to do to do that?
Yeah, so I've seen plenty of images out there that already kind of create a blend of different artist styles. So, for me, I like Star Wars and I like HR Giga, and I know I've seen AI images generated as a blend of those two things, which very much a copyrightable material. You can't just, but then the whole world is kind of influenced by those styles. There's a bazillion, and it's not a real number, but there's just an incredible number of pieces of fan art and of cultural things out there that isn't necessarily even the original content itself. And I don't know what it's trained on, whether it's trained on content that is fan art. I mean, maybe it escapes the loophole of training it on the original content if it's just training it on all the kind of byproducts that it is created in that sense. Because if there's a million fan art images that are inspired by Star Wars or Studio Ghibli in this example, and they're just freely on YouTube or they're freely on Google or they're on Instagram, if those organizations give access for their data to be scraped, it doesn't mean that AI has been trained on all the movies that Studio Ghibli produces. It may just be that there's enough tags and keywords that are put into all these different places, and so it kind of understands when the tag Studio Ghibli is kind of summoned and used and associated with certain styles of images, I guess. And it doesn't have to be the original content. That's the unfortunate thing. But I guess it's a sign of how absolutely permeated in our culture those styles and images are. Really, it's difficult. It's hard to know because I think that, like you say, you can't blame the audience, the user necessarily. If it's accessible and it's fun, people will use it. And you can't blame a 12-year-old in the world for you can't put that moral kind of dilemma upon them and judge them accordingly. That if they're 12, 13 and it's fun and it's accessible and free, they're going to do it. Of course they're going to do it. It's too fun to not do. And even if they thought it was wrong, they still probably do it. So I think unfortunately we all know it's wrong to use plastic in many ways. It's not good for the environment, but does it stop us go out and buying plastic things? Not really. And so as much as there may be a moral objection to using anything that may have those keywords in, I think that the vast majority of, well, not the vast majority, but a significant chunk of the world just won't care really about that. So I guess it comes down to, can you copyright it? Can you put it through the court system? Can you act effectively through the legal system? I don't know whether that's even possible, really. I guess it is yet to be seen, really. I mean, is there a legal case in that then? So run that by me. So is that?
Well, there was one case. There's a couple of things that are going very it's really spiraling a little bit. Like someone made an app that was called like the Ghibli Studio or something like that. Something really sillily close. and they received a cease and desist order because that app was simply just using like a
Yes.
similar prompt style idea and like
And if you're
taking
titling
that
it
down.
that specifically, it's a bit on the nose, isn't it? It's a bit too much.
Yeah.
But
I think I must admit, I think when I saw all this happening, like in the last few days, for me there was a moment where obviously the fact that they've only just updated the model,
yeah,
so the ChatGPT version has basically been updated, and then now that that's happened, this is the results just like 2 to 3 days later, or however many days. For me is insane. Like, to me, the cat is out the bag now. Like we already kind of to a degree thought, there's no going back from it, but now it's got to this level. I it's unstoppable now in my eyes completely now. Like, and it's insane to me, like how it's just exploded, and the detail in which some of these images are created, from an image creation kind of thing, fascinating and like interesting how it's done. But at the same time, like, that is an artistic style specifically to them. Now, obviously, they are within a niche. I guess I don't know whether or not you would refer to it as manga. And please, if anyone in the comments would say that, but that kind of cartoony manga-ish style.
Manga is a brand as far as I know. Like Studio Ghibli is a brand, but yeah, it's
Gotcha.
a lot of anime style was associated with manga, so it's anime, yes. More broadly.
So it's a style within a style to a degree. Like, there's an umbrella over the top. But what's interesting here is that Sam Altman was asked about it, and is just cracking jokes about it, like about being like, guys, please just like slow down a little bit. Our team needs time to sleep because people are just enjoying it so much, which only kind of alludes to, oh, well, what's he talking about? And then I'll go do it, and then it just keeps going and doesn't stop.
Of course.
And it just keeps going and going. And what's really interesting is I did an experiment because I thought, again, like what we were just talking about, how far has this gone? Like, how far has the database gone so far for them in terms of what they've scraped and the artistic styles of people, and how far has it gone in terms of collecting information? I actually put an image into ChatGPT. Excuse me for looking at my phone at the same time, but I actually put an image into ChatGPT because I wanted to see if it had certain styles of us, and more importantly, yourself. Because I thought, well, with your subscriber base and your style, etc., that's been pretty consistent for such a long time. There's a lot of consistency there for people to understand. I downloaded just a regular landscape image and said, can you style this image in the style of the YouTube artist known as James Julier, and keep all the details? It then decided to give me a little bit of text just to start with. Say, James Julier's art style focuses on semi-realistic digital landscapes with a painterly touch, vibrant colors, and strong lighting effects. I'll transform your image to match that style and keep all the details, and give me a moment. It started doing what it was going to do, and then immediately kind of backtracked, because it then came out to say I wasn't able to generate the image because the request violates our content policies. If you'd like, you can try rephrasing your request or providing a different prompt, and I'll be happy to help. And then I was like, right, I'll upload the image again and I'll ask it in a slightly different way. Restyle this image in James Julier style and keep the details. And then again, this time it doubled down on its kind of policy idea of saying, I can't directly modify the image in James Julier style, but you can achieve this look by using digital painting techniques. If you're familiar with Procreate or Photoshop, here are some of the steps you would need in order to transform this image. Number one, use painterly brush styles, and then a couple of extra bits underneath, but I'll skip over it. I'll just do the bullet points. 2, enhance the lighting and contrast. 3, simplify and stylize details. And 4, refine edges and depth. And again, it doubled down on its content violation, which is fascinating, because why is Studio Ghibli, to a degree, exempt from that? That's what I want to know. I want to know why. Like, does it get? Do these companies say, no, it's so generally known and understood and huge in terms of a style that's just free reign? We can go for it.
Is it possible that it's been told that individuals can't be mimicked in that sense? So if you did, I mean, we discussed this. I mean, because I've looked up, I've seen images generated in the style of H.R. Giger, one of my favorite artists. But it's all, well, he's not no longer alive. I don't know whether that bears any relevance to it. But I wonder whether it does violate because it's an individual artist, rather than a. I think Studio Ghibli almost transcend. Well, it does transcend that. It's a company anyway, isn't it? And it's an in-house style with various
Yeah.
artists. But it is almost crossed over into a kind of cultural reference, isn't it? Studio Ghibli style would be understood. There's plenty of images out there that aren't Studio Ghibli, but the people would refer to it as having a Studio Ghibli style.
Mm.
So yeah, maybe it may. I don't know. It's hard to know, isn't it? Unless you have access to the back door of the technology and understand all of that. It's impossible to. It seems very hit and miss sometimes, doesn't it, with AI
Mm.
prompts and searches? But it's quite
If that
relieving in some ways.
if that had come back and gave me an image in your style, how would that have made you
I don't know
feel?
what my style is. I mean, I know that there are certain things.
Rainforest brush.
Yeah,
Rainforest brush would have been
maybe,
like 90% of it.
yeah. But even then, it's like the stuff I do for my personal style that isn't on my tutorials. Yeah, there's a certain aesthetic that if there was enough of it out there in the world, I could see it spitting out something similar to what that stuff is. But the stuff I do for tutorials is just generally landscape that might be a little bit more realistic in some instances, and then other times it's a little bit more anime style. I don't think
Mm.
it's that distinctive personally anyway to concern me. Other people might recognize it as having a style, but I don't. We all have an aesthetic interest, don't we? Things we gravitate towards more than others, but
Yeah.
I don't really count it as my aesthetic is not my tutorials anyway, so it wouldn't have worried me in that case. But it is curious, it is interesting that it just refuses to do that. Yeah,
But
I've
if it
not.
did come back and said, yeah, regardless of how it may or may not have interpreted your style, if it came back with an image that said, yeah, I've styled this up in the style of James Julier, and there were elements in which, some people could easily, maybe kind of
But
gauge that maybe it was, how it, well, I'm trying to more avoid the fact of what the image would look like, just more
yeah,
the fact it said, yes, I've done this for you in a James Julier
I would
style.
be impressed that that I registered significantly enough for it to understand that. I
Mm,
mean, I guess it did a little bit because it came back with an explanation, didn't it?
yeah.
The dialogue, it's been well trained enough on the internet generally, um, but in terms of the content we put out, I don't feel I don't. It's strange because my product is a lesson. It's not an image. So okay, it produces our images, but I don't really care because that's not the backbone of what we put out there.
Yeah.
Our content is a lesson, is a tutorial, and so at the point at which it is able to create tutorials for people in my style, then my toes are well and truly trodden upon. But um, just presenting an image out there in the world that is supposedly in my style or not, as a YouTube landscape painter, it's like, well, that's useless to people because they're not looking for the image; they're looking for the skills to create it for themselves. That is
Mm,
that is our output, isn't it? So I wouldn't feel threatened by that personally. Um, I would be amazed if it was able to do it. It would it would be scary because then I know we're a step closer to it being able to produce video content that is emulating our tutorials. Whether it would be coherent enough to take someone from beginning to end in a coherent tutorial that directly relates to the tools in the app and the percentages and I struggle to think that we're anywhere close to that stage because the amount of data it would have to scrape to be able to put together something coherent in that one niche style. I think we're unless it's able to somehow really reason a little bit better because at the minute all it does is it works on averages, doesn't it? So you give it a certain sequence of words or images and it can predict what is most likely to be next, um is as far as my understanding goes of it, but it's not able to really compute how easy or how difficult that would be for someone to understand, as far as I know, unless it has an infinite amount of content to really train itself upon. But yeah, I mean, it would be scary if you're a visual artist and your output was your paintings and drawings, and that you were making money from that, and your livelihood depended upon that, or just even your reputation. It would make me very nervous, in many ways, as a digital artist. Anyway, it's different if you do traditional work because it can't do that. But um, it's a concern, isn't it? I mean, how would you feel if you put JoelCreate in there and it produced images that look eerily similar to your output? How would you feel?
I think there's definitely a level of like potentially on like a not selfish level, but on a personal level, you'd be like, oh wow, I made the cut. You can't help but think that,
Yeah, short term, we'd feel like that,
short
perhaps.
term,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, you'd be like, oh, holy, like you'd be like, this is crazy, like
yeah,
for me to have made the cut.
hmm
But then, as you said, that's how you'd feel immediately, and then you'd be like, oh, okay, what could people do with this that would then you can't help but go, how does this backfire on me? Like, how could I then be wrapped up in something that never even happened, kind of vibe? And I know we're just talking about digital images, that's fine. But if it came back and went, oh, here's a horrific image of a historical moment, let's just keep it vague, and in this style of JoelCreate or James Julier, you'd be like, what on earth? And like someone posted that online, just completed Joel's latest tutorial. I'd be like, no, you bloody didn't. Like, that's nothing to do with me. So you kind of like, that's the scary kind of part of it, like that. And also a little bit of like powerlessness in a way of being like, this has happened, and once that is there, it's not going anywhere. Like, that's it. That is what it. That's what will remain. So there's nothing you could do. But then I guess that, we don't get upset to, it's image creation. It's different. I was going to say, like, when you get ranked on Google and, you type in your name and all the results come up for everything and this, that, and the other. And, that's doing all of its sort of intelligence behind the scenes. But it's different when it's image creation. And you're right. Like, we've not done this show for very long. Like, we're almost a year in, I think, if not a year. I can't remember exactly.
Is it May?
It's very close.
It's around May, I think, isn't it? Yeah.
May time. So, like, we've spoken about AI, and only in the period of this show has it already got to this level. Like, the stuff I'm seeing this week as well, in terms of like its accuracy and its uses and use cases, there's going to be a lot of ad agencies that are screwed.
Yeah.
Like, if once people can sit down and just do like an hour's worth of learning personally, you can make a photo shoot, you can do, put your product in there, you can, and make it, you can literally say, here's an ad I really like, and here's my product, blend them together, and it will just do it. And text is accurate now. That used to be horrific with text and hands and stuff like that. And people are going to really struggle, and it's going to really affect a lot of things. And what I actually personally feel like is, it's like, it was this thing in the back of my mind for a while in terms of like what its capabilities were. But that thing, or let's call it a monster if you want to, that thing was like 10 feet away. And now it's only, in my eyes, 2 or 3. Like, there's not, like, for example, I'm even thinking about this as we're talking, and I'm like, if I uploaded a really simple design, let's just literally draw like a green line across the screen, fill in the bottom area with grass, and draw a mountain like grey like shape, and then put a blue sky. 3 layers. Could I ask it to break that down and it give me instructions on how to do it in Procreate? Because I feel like if the simplified image is enough, if it's really simple, I think it could potentially do it. And I'm only saying that based off of my understanding previously of even asking it to create an oil paint brush in Procreate, and that video that I made that really rubbed up a few people the wrong way, but also really got a lot of people's imagination.
Ruffled a few feathers, didn't it?
Yeah. And if you want to watch it, I'll leave a link to it in the description. That'll be great. Get the views.
It's a really interesting experiment, I thought. But yeah,
and that was its only intention, was to be interested and curious and see what these things can do. But again, if I could upload that image to it now, and it could say, yeah, create a new layer, use the selection tool, color fill turned on, and just create a green block for the ground, like that, then I'm like, okay. Because what I then think is, okay, if it could do that and provide the instructions, at least, how like some people can create videos on YouTube and there's no one behind it in terms of like, there's not a person like you or I who create these things. It's you've gone to one AI prompt and it's provided you with a lot of information. Then you drag that into another tool, and then that gives you images and videos that can go alongside it as B-roll and graphics for on screen. And then you go to a third tool that combines them together, and you add a voiceover from a fourth tool. And then before you know it, you've got a video that can go on YouTube and talk about a subject. But it was no one ever sat down behind Photoshop, behind a microphone, and did the research potentially. It was just 10 minutes worth of work potentially for a video that could get unlimited views and like really churn them out. So then what I think is if someone could potentially get that breakdown from a ChatGPT, for example, what's their process in order to replicate that exact same idea of it gave me the steps, it gave me the images. Is there a possible way of me taking that into another tool, not to get like a graphic of a hand doing it on top, but at least creating essentially what is a slideshow with a voiceover to guide
that I
people
can
through
see
it?
potential, but I don't think it would do it without a significant input from a human being at this point. I think the human being would at this point and would be required to put in. I think that the technologies, if there were thousands of YouTube Procreate teachers out there, and therefore millions and millions and millions of videos as data to scrape, then I think it could average it out and figure out, and it would remain coherent enough. But I think that currently there just isn't enough out there to scrape. And we've got a few hundred videos each, and you've got another handful of artists with a few hundred videos each. It's not that many really in the scheme of things. I mean, most of the content now is generated off millions of images, and even the Studio Ghibli stuff. There's a lot of hours of content in Studio Ghibli. There's millions of stills of Studio Ghibli styled images out there, and so it has a lot of reference points to draw upon. Whereas I don't think that the amount of content is out there in a Procreate YouTube drawing and painting tutorial yet to make it coherent. It could probably, I think it would be able to create something that looked convincing in terms of the way it was presented. It sounds right, it looks right, but if you actually try and follow it, it would be complete nonsense. I think that's more likely at this point.
Yeah. But
Just
my
like
concern,
get hallucinations,
just like,
they call it, don't they?
yeah, exactly. But my concern is just like those channels that are currently on YouTube and are just flooding spaces with videos that are just AI generated completely and no one behind them, is as soon as Procreate can be broken down by these tools, and we can create these slideshow style videos that I just kind of rustled up in my mind that match at least the sort of styles of those other videos that are flooding YouTube. Is that there could be a channel that comes out on the start of the year and could create 10 tutorials a day in comparison to us as people, as creators, as people that have to sit down and come up with an idea or get lost in a design for an hour or two before then refining, before then recording and sitting down and doing it again and then editing and uploading. That's where I'm like, how far is that? I'm thinking it's 3 or 4 feet behind me, I don't think it's that far away in my mind.
I think the reason, I mean, all of us in this space that are producing these tutorials that have really become popular, we all show our hands producing the image though, and it isn't a slideshow. And as much as it could be a slideshow with narration, fine, but it still needs to understand the program well enough. It needs to understand in real life what brush size it should be on the scale. On the slider, it needs to know the opacity, and they might seem like simple things for it to understand, but I don't think they are. I think that almost all of AI is aesthetic, really. I don't think it has any understanding of content, really. It just knows what tends to come next, and it's getting better at doing that. Like, for example, you could create a music video perfectly easy using AI these days. If you've got music and you tell it roughly the kind of visual style you want it to be in, it needs to include X, Y, and Z, and it needs to be in time to the musical elements, the rhythm and things, I think it could spit out something that would be amazing. And I think people that are in those professions would need to worry, because it doesn't need to be coherent. It can be quite surreal even, and not pinned together. But when something has to be logical to the point of people can follow the steps and it actually produce something, I think it needs to come from a human at this point. And I don't know, in the future, it's possible that it will fill in. It will have the ability to use logic. I don't think AI at the minute uses a lot of logic. I don't think that's really what it does, as far as my understanding of it, anyway. Um, I think that it just, you need an expert to explain it, really. But as far as I'm aware, it's like you give it 4 out of the 5 steps, and it knows what the 6th one should be, and then from that, it's got 6 in place, and so it knows what the 7th component should be, and it just spirals and spirals. And I think that can produce things that look amazing, but I don't know whether it would produce things that are coherent enough to actually be a tutorial. I mean, we're going off on a tangent here, aren't we? But yeah, in terms of Studio Ghibli, there's a lot of areas where it can forgive, really, isn't it? There's a lot of examples out there for it to be trained on, and if it's a little bit off here and there, and it doesn't, not that they look pretty perfect, don't they? But there's no logic in there. It's just purely an aesthetic thing, and I think AI is very good at creating an aesthetic. It's like if you ask it to do a recipe, well, there's millions and millions and millions of food recipes out there. So, and it knows to aggregate those and blend them together in a way that is most likely to be the successful version of that. But with our tutorials, you might be able to create 1 or 2 like that, but then how would you keep it different every week? How would you push it forward? And how, because it creates an average of what's already out there, and so it would spit out an average each time, and how is it going to progress it forward and create something new? I don't know. Do you have any contrary thoughts to that, or do you think that I'm being naive?
No, I think what's really important here is that, especially for listeners, is everybody's going to have a different opinion, and it doesn't matter whether or not we're talking about this, or we're talking about politics, or we're talking about anything else. Like, please don't go at people for what they feel about the situation. If you're that type of person, quite frankly, I'll just block you on this channel. It's just as simple as that. I'm happy for you to voice your opinion, but not in response to other people's. Happy to see that in the comments.
We don't want fights and arguments, do we?
No, absolutely not. And that's not what our space typically is about in terms of Procreate and our communities. It's not like that at all. I can see, I get the kind of feel from you hearing you talk about it, that I don't feel like you're potentially on the side of, that it's, dangerous in any way.
For us.
Well, I mean, I personally think that it is, what I'm getting at is, like, I think it's good that we have kind of differing opinions on it to a degree. Like, I think you're far more, I would say, a bit more chill about it in a certain way.
Currently,
yeah. And me personally, I just think, like, it's the curve that it's ramping up at, and the things that we're going to find out that people can do, and things that people can manipulate in certain ways, and especially just the general image creation is just insane. But the art styles of people like that, and the Studio Ghibli style, I'm a bit sad for him, if I'm honest. Like, it's obviously it's an artistic style that people always wanted to learn to do and do.
It's a victim of its success in this example, isn't it? Yeah,
to a degree, yeah, absolutely. And like, but people that have wanted to learn to draw it go to classes or follow classes, and breakdowns and education, and go down this educational route in order to replicate it. And I it's sad in a way, to a degree, where I think most people may or may not now be like, oh, well, I'm not going to bother learning it. I'll just upload a photo quickly and turn my profile picture into this. Like, and that's sad, because it's been taken away from someone to go through the process of learning it and going through that process.
It is a concern long term with AI, that I think that, if people, in order to express themselves, can get the technology to do all the legwork for them, and their visual style and quirks and their thoughts and things that spring to their mind can be generated with that ease, that amount of ease, why would they spend 20 years learning the skills to do it in a form that takes 100 hours to execute, when they
Yeah.
can put in a few words? I mean, if it is just a case of getting an image across, um, and it's a tough one, isn't it? I can see a time in 20, 30 years where, if you're a young person, why would you bother? I mean, maybe the different. I mean, I was going to ask you this: do you have an escape plan? I mean, we're talking worst case scenario here, where AI just totally dominates all of the digital spaces and the online space. What would you do creatively? Do you have a thought on where you would turn if that were the case?
I don't think there's a lot of creativity. That's a really good question. I really like that. I don't think there's a lot of creativity outputs at the minute that I don't think it could touch, if that makes sense. Like,
The next
yeah,
10 years, say then. Let's say the next 10 years.
God, that is interesting.
Because ultimately, yeah, it's going to be able to sculpt and paint and do all these traditional things. If there are AI robots out there that can actually move a paintbrush, of course, but we're not in this situation yet, are we? So, and maybe in another 50 years' time, or 20 years' time, maybe 15 years' time, but I don't see, you know, I mean, unless Tesla are working on a Android, a robot that will be out there and can actually manipulate physical materials, and actually create artworks in the style of I don't know, a Henry Moore or whoever sculpting wise. It's possible, but I don't think we're there yet. So, I've asked you the question and now I'm answering the question from my point of view. I've just
No, it's fine.
overtaken that, but
It gave me a moment to think about it. I think if it, let's say it does explode, you can ask it, teach me how to draw this in Procreate, and it does it, and whatever. Maybe even generates a video for you to watch. Let's just say it's worst case scenario. I think all that does is just emphasize I don't want to deep this on a level and get too like maybe with my wording potentially kind of hippie-ish. I don't know if it's hippie-ish. Let me just say it and you can let me know. But I think all it will ever do then at that stage is just emphasize the beauty of a human, the human essence, the human part of it, like the learning off of somebody else, the learning from your parents or your grandparents, or learning from a tutor, or going to an art class of somebody that you really admire and sit in and following a Bob Ross painting video. I only think it will emphasize the traditional elements, but then I thought about this for a second then, and I was like, where do me and you fit there? Like if we're in a box, where do we fit on that scale? Because then you've got, again, worst case scenario, 10 years from now, Procreate is something that ChatGPT can tell you how to do and create videos for you. That's the worst case. And then you've got traditional learning from a tutor, painting traditionally, let's say, over here. Where do we sit? Like that, where do we sit in that? And I think our box of what we do slides that way. I think it goes closer towards that because, again, it's got that human element. You don't want to sit and watch a slideshow or hear a robot talk. And I know they get really good and their voices are, getting even better. But you don't get that human level of it, that understanding of this guy's so talented, or this woman, the lady, they, them, whatever it may be, are so talented, and I just want to learn from them. You can't get admiration for a program.
No,
it doesn't work. Like you don't get that, but you can get that from looking at artists and artistic styles and go, I want to do that.
We don't go and watch robots race at the Olympics, do we? We want to see the best that humans can do.
Bingo. Love that.
And so I agree. I think that the internet will become so saturated with our AI that we won't necessarily be able to discern the difference in many situations. But I think it might just point people to real world interactions, and I don't think it will kill digital art. I think that because a lot of people do it for fun anyway, and they're not necessarily looking to build a career out of it even, or an artist's reputation. They just do it because it's relaxing, it's meditative, and it's in a convenient format to do it in. And it still allows them to play around with images and be creative, and it feels really authentically kind of hands-on still. I think that will always exist. I think people will still always want that, even if digital art images on the internet are kind of devalued by AI, even if there's
Mm.
no monetary, because a lot of people do it without intention of selling. They just like to do it as an exercise, don't they? I mean, certainly if I was a multi-millionaire at this point, I would still do paintings, even if I didn't intend to show them in galleries. It's not something I do necessarily to show to the world and earn money. It's something it's a thing to do, to its own end, really, isn't it? Because it's a fun, a nice pastime. So
There's also, I think, an element now where I think it's got to the point where, like, I think like these stores like Etsy and so on are going to explode, since this update, because you can create a poster that says anything you want
yeah, it's
with
true.
anything you want, and it's going to just go. And then as long as you can provide the printing facility, which a
Yeah.
lot of the time is automated anyway, the order goes off to a printing company, they ship it and send it, and you just sit back. All you
But
had
that
to
will
do is make the
cheapen that
image.
aesthetic, which is back to
No,
what
but
I
it
was saying.
will. But I also think it's gonna need certain part like regulation in a way. And when I
Yeah.
say regulation, I mean like authenticity. Like I only think that what we're going to end up with is these people like on websites like that where people are going to have these authenticity kind of badges alongside them to
Mm.
say genuine creative person and processes have been used in this image
If it
only.
can authenticate that, I don't know who
Well, no, but
authenticates, but
I don't think it will be. No, I think you will have to sign up. I don't think we don't need to get into the processes to a
no.
degree of it, but there won't be this kind of automated thing. It would be like I'm signing up, and when you sign up, are you how can you? God, I am getting into the processes of it, but are you an authentic? Do you use AI in your work? Yes or no?
Yeah.
And then you'd be signing up as
There might be AI
an
systems
authentic
that can
creator.
check. There might be AI systems that are able to analyze an image and understand whether it is
Yeah,
likely to have been AI generated. Because I'm sure there must be a difference between an AI generated image and a hand drawn image, even though it does an incredibly good job at um, mimicking the authentic content. There must be something that an AI that was equally sophisticated would be able to detect the origin of it. I mean, maybe that's the way it is, like an arms race, that you get the detection and the creation and the detection of that content that could be, because as a product, I don't know. It would take someone to invent it and maintain it, and where was the funding coming from for that? You can see where the funding would come from for people wanting to use AI images, and they make money off of it. But then,
mm,
who's policing it, and where does their funding come from? I guess in that example. But then maybe a website that guarantees, if they use that technology and you buy things from that website and they guarantee that all of their content is created by humans, then people might gravitate towards that website more because that company is invested in the technology to absolutely guarantee that anything bought from there is genuinely human. And
yeah.
that might be something that companies in time
That's
um,
exactly where I was going with it.
might be interested
Like
in investing in. Yeah,
there'll be a badge there to say, like on,
yeah,
like I don't know, an IKEA website, on IKEA in their
yeah.
bio or whatever, all of our content is and graphic content is created by humans, and we're
Because
proud of
it
that
does
kind
change
of
things, doesn't it?
metric.
It is only perhaps a psychological shift, but to know that a human has poured time and effort into something, I think that it does change it, and maybe it is just purely a magical thinking that that is the only place it makes a difference is in the mind's eye. And you tell somebody that something was made by AI, and suddenly they have one perception, and you say it's created by a human, and then they have a different perception, and it's purely that label that's going to make it valuable or not valuable. But it still matters, doesn't it? I think it does change things. I think when people know that, like you could look at sort of like a photograph on a screen, and someone says it's a photograph, and then you realize it's a drawing, and you might zoom in, you might still not be able to detect the actual grain of the pencil marks. But if you know it's a drawing, suddenly it becomes a very different thing,
It's
doesn't
very
it?
true.
Um,
Absolutely. And I wonder
who
if it's a
knows?
spectrum, like and a scale of, I think I'm thinking it now in terms of products, like canvases, and like I'm thinking of stuff like that, and I'm wondering whether or not, like, would you pay that £10 more for the one that was created by a person, or would you go to like a Temu or whatever it was, where you can get that same canvas but it's done by AI and it's £3 or £4 and shipped from wherever, complete, like the cheapest possible variation?
I
Because
get
I
you.
think
Yeah,
I
it could
do
look the
think
same. It could look the same. That's
and I don't want
unfortunate,
to
isn't
I
it?
don't want to sort of say or call out a certain like group, but I'm saying like
No,
potentially down that at that kind of Timu kind of level, people don't care. Like, I want
no, of
that
course.
poster for my wall. I want it's going to go in my
Yeah,
wall, and where it came from, I couldn't care less. But then
that's
there's going
always
to be
been the
people
case,
that
though.
care.
Yeah, that's always been the case. I mean, there's people that buy posters and prints, and then there's people that buy original works of art, from a gallery. There's always been that divide of people who buy certain products, hasn't there? So I think
Mm,
there'll always be a prestige thing attached to it. It might just push people more towards traditional work rather than digital ultimately in the end. But it won't stop me doing digital work. I still will always keep creating it in some context. It has shifted it personally. If I'm going to put 100 hours into something, I might be inclined to do it in a traditional piece of work. And I see digital as first of all, it's for the tutorial side, but I use it as a way of generating ideas now that I can then take forward and use in traditional mediums. Um,
yeah,
just because if I'm going to spend that much time and labor into something, I want to put it into something that I could put on a wall and people will see it and perhaps admire it for the effort that's gone into it. Whereas I think that people can be arrested by a digital image and be impressed by it, but then they move past it because it's a digital image. It doesn't sustain
mm,
the same amount of time from people. People, if they scroll past it on a screen, typically, don't they, with a digital image, and they'll admire it for a moment and then it's gone. Whereas a painting on a wall, I think it warrants that heavier investment of
absolutely,
time. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, just kind of, I guess, sort of to wrap it to a degree, it would be
Yeah.
fascinating to know potentially the copyright outcome of this. Will
Hmm.
anything come out of it? The virality of it makes it so large that this is maybe a moment that you could reflect back on potentially and say that was the moment that changed it for copyright heavily.
Yeah.
Should anything actually happen, and the speed in which this happens, who knows? We'll be talking about it next week, but yeah, we'll
We
see what
try
the
to
outcome
space it
of
out.
it.
We try to space out the episodes on AI because
Absolutely.
this
I
is
mean,
the
a lot of
thing.
the weeks there's nothing really to talk about, but this
Yeah.
week it's just been huge, and I can't
Yeah.
escape it on my timelines.
Yeah.
And content creators talking about it. So I wanted to share the story and to see what
Definitely.
people's opinions are. Please drop your opinions in the comments down below. Again, keep it friendly against other people's opinions. Just stick to your own and don't respond to anybody else's unless it's a healthy conversation. But I don't want to see anybody rowing in the comments. Anyway, let's move on because, of course, as we normally do every single week, we're releasing tutorials on YouTube and Patreon and so on. The first image I've got for us to look at is the one that I released on Patreon this week. And that was an 80s style sort of poster design.
Yeah.
I
Looks
haven't done
great.
one of these kind of styles for quite some time now. And just absolutely having fun with like layering in content and textures and effects and just having no other word for it than fun. This is a bit of a kind of less. There's not so much drawing in this. It's more like a little bit of manipulation, just
Yeah.
just creating content to a degree. For example, the Lamborghini. I show people how to cut it out. It's an
Yeah.
image, and then the grungish texture on the side. Layering that in for the poster kind of rough edges to it, adding text. The little amount of drawing is literally the grid brush to create the floor and then distorting it to fit. But
Yeah.
I love these kind of poster style designs, and I was reflecting back on a few of my older styles and pieces and just seeing like all the types of things I've done and remembering like the other options that are out there because
Yeah.
we do so much of it that you quite easily go down a route and repeat potentially. So it was fun to go back and see some of the old stuff and try and replicate that in with new things that we've learned over time. So
Looks really
little
great.
80s poster.
Have you used the chromatic aberration on that? Is that
Yeah.
what's ghosting those kind of rainbow
Yeah, on
colours,
the
isn't it? That's great.
text
Yeah.
as well as on the Lamborghini as well to
Yes.
get that red and blue, which nicely kind of marries up to the pinks and
Yeah.
purpley blues as well, which looks really cool. Just gave it a bit of distortion that
Yeah.
made it far more kind of at home in the rest of the
Yeah.
piece, really.
That's great.
Yeah, it's very very fun to do, and people have enjoyed it, and managed to replicate it quite well. Because of course a lot of the structure's already there to a degree.
Yeah.
Um,
I like it.
Moving on though to another tutorial that I made. This one is on YouTube, and this is a landscape inspired by the Italian nature park. I don't know if that's necessarily, I can't remember off the top of my head exactly what it was or the name of it, but it's in the description of the actual video itself, as well as images of the real world place. Simplified slightly. There's no mountains in the background area, like fully back there. Just wanted to simplify it and just take inspiration from a real world landscape and go from it and carry on that Blackburn brush.
It's a great brush.
Tutorial
Yeah.
style.
Yeah. I really like the brush style. It's really expressive, isn't it? And in a way that, has an immediacy about it. I like it. Very vibrant.
Very I can't stop using it, really enjoying it, although I have stopped using it for the next tutorial I'm releasing on YouTube, so I'll have a break again. I mean, I did put something in between this one and the last Blackburn one as well, because again, like, we've said it many times, you don't want to kind of bore people with it, but if people enjoy it, it can come
Procreate,
back
the Blackburn one. Is that a Procreate brush? Yeah, I might have to.
It's under drawing.
Right, I'll have a look at that one. It is pretty cool, because I do struggle sometimes to keep things looser and expressive. There's a tendency to just, because you want texture and you want something in there, you don't want it to look flat, so you can spend hours manually putting in texture, which is, one aesthetic. But I think actually it can look a lot more effective to be slightly less overly fussed over, can't it? I think it can give that really fresh look. I like it.
And then we get to the final tutorial that we've released, and that is one from yourself. This beautiful, is it a barn?
Yeah, it's like an old wood barn that you might see if you're driving past on a road out in the kind of rural areas somewhere. Don't know where in the world, but and you might just sort of see that kind of ramshackled wood barn stood there is the idea.
I love it. I love the color, the general color scheme of it. It's got that kind of sepia almost like look to it.
I've done a lot of really vibrant, Studio Ghibli inspired blue skies, and so it's quite nice to do something that's just a bit more. Although it is spring here and we're heading towards summer, and this has more kind of autumnal feel to it, doesn't it, in a way? But I like that kind of sepia tone. I enjoy doing the lighting on the sky. I think I've done very stylized skies, and so to do something that looks more typically like it looks like a UK sky, really. That kind of a hint of blue in there somewhere, but a lot of grey and a lot of diffused light in the sky is more typical of the kind of almost sunny days that we often get at this time of year. And grass is always a pain, trying to get grass textures in there. I had a few attempts at this, and this is the version on camera that I ended up with, and I was happy in the end. But I did edit out all the little attempts at it. It was mainly the colours. I was trying to introduce more greens, and because we picked the colour palette before we started the tutorial, I found that the greens just weren't the right kind of greens once I started the tutorial, because I've got like greens in the shadow of the barn, and I was intending to do more greens diffused throughout the foreground as well, but they just didn't gel. It didn't really work, so I ended up leaving it as it was, and I was quite happy with it in the end. But it just shows you, even when you're producing tutorials, they don't necessarily end up how you intended them sometimes, and they end up a bit different, don't they? And I guess that's the beauty of creating art, isn't it? Is that sometimes it takes on a life of its own.
I love the fact that you've done all the blades of grass and then done the tops of all of the blades as well with the rainforest. It's so like, in a way, like simple, like the application of it, but it's so effective. Like, and it looks great with all the growths on top of them, and then that kind of blanket of it towards the rear. I love this piece.
Appreciate
It's
it.
really cool.
Thank you.
It's cool to see the different color scheme as well, like you said, like compared to some of the vibrant colors of previous ones.
You've got to
To
mix
go
it
down
up,
that
haven't
kind
you?
of a little bit muted, but at the same time, it's got that warm feel to it, which is really cool to see. And it's nice to see it among some of your other pieces as well, because it just is that tiny bit of variety if people prefer that kind of general aesthetic. It's really
definitely
cool.
Thank you.
Would you do, just out of curiosity, and this is again where sometimes these images are up for perception. It's not just like a lack of understanding from myself potentially, but would you do, is that a wooden barn or is it metal? Because to me,
Well,
it
I know
looks
what
like
you're saying.
irrigated metal with the rust on it.
Yeah, it was a bit confused in my mind. I mean, I saw it as a wood structure, but the more I worked on it, the more it kind of headed towards almost that metal look, didn't it? Of corrugated metal. It was, I drew it as intending it to be wood, and then I realized that actually to do all the boards with a wood grain is quite time consuming. And so it ended up heading more towards that almost corrugated metal look. And it's even got sort of like rust on it, hasn't it, in the end, on that blue side. So yeah,
It
it
makes
was
sense
intended to be
perfectly
wood.
either way, though.
Yeah, yes, yeah. So I would see it as wood, but yeah, because of the limitations of time and doing individual wood grains, we'll go for it almost being corrugated metal as well. Whichever you
Lovely
prefer.
piece.
Yeah.
Is it? What's the kind of reception to this one been?
It's been okay actually. Yeah, I mean, I had a week where I didn't produce anything, and therefore, you take a hit on the algorithm, don't you? It's pretty unforgiving. But this one's it's doing okay. It's about on average. We've got the back house side of the analytics for people that obviously don't produce content won't know this, but you get different color ticks. If you have an up arrow and a down arrow, which is in gray or green if it's up is good, and then you have a tick which is in green if it's on track for your general performance, and it's got green ticks. It's not got up, so it's not ahead of my general success rate, but yeah, it's got a green tick, so I'm okay with that. As long as we don't get a grey down arrow, that's the thing, isn't it? We dread seeing those, but yeah, it's done okay. Yeah,
awesome, James. Thank you so much, mate, for an
thank
awesome
you.
conversation on all things AI and taking a look back at our tutorials this week. As always, if you want to support the show, best thing you can do for us is to subscribe to the channel. That'd be absolutely amazing if you could hit the subscribe button down below. If you want to take your support to the next level, you can become a member of the channel and you can hit the join button to do so, or there's a link to it in the description down below. You get a loyalty badge beside your name that grows over time the longer you are a supporter. You get early access to the show as well, so you can be roughly around about 6 or 5 days ahead of time. So be sure to check that out using the link in the description down below. And before we go, last week we posted our second doodle challenge, monthly doodle challenge. That is currently active. Head to the previous video or the video that will be at the end of this one. You can tap on that and watch it and participate in our second monthly doodle challenge. So make sure to check that out as well. And we'll see you again next week for another episode of the Sketch Wave. Bye-bye for now.